MSNBC is facing ridicule online after a year-old opinion piece on, quote, fascist fitness groups resurfaced, titled Why the Far Right is Really Into Home Fitness, White Supremacists' Latest Scheme to Valorize Violence and Hypermasculinity has gone digital. The article draws explicit connections between white supremacy and fascism and extreme workout culture.
Yesterday, the piece made the rounds online after Elon Musk's tweet responded to it, saying, quote, MSNBC thinks you're a Nazi if you work out. LMAO. I remember this piece the first time it made the rounds. I'm not quite sure why it's doing that again, but
well, I
yes,
think it's because we were having this conversation about.
Well, I think it's because they retweeted it.
But RFK Jr., why did they retweet it? We're having a whole month-long discourse about RFK Jr.'s thirst trap gym pics and whether or not there's some relationship between your personal fitness and health to your ability to lead. People have been doing a lot of those side-by-side memes of, Joe Rogan and RFK Jr. with people that they disagree with politically and who they see as also less physically attractive or fit, saying, which way west, young man? Who would you prefer to have leadership? So there is a linking of people in this community of kind of mental fitness and respect and public stature to physical fitness. That is definitely something that's happening.
But physical fitness is good, and being healthy is good, and getting exercise is good, and there's no reason to stigmatize these things. I'm sure there are very left-wing progressive people who work out a lot too, and normally mainstream people and people of all political stripes, and yeah, it's kind of silly.
So I don't think that the article stigmatizes working out. It's not saying that working out is bad simply because people in a, let's say, conservative or Nazi...
Are you crushing it at the gym? You might be a right-wing white nationalist.
I don't think that is what, in all fairness, the argument that the article is making. It's asking why, not whether or not the trend itself is bad, but what it means for a particular community to have identified itself with a particular non-political thing like fitness.
But here's the question: is it even a trend? I mean, certainly there's like Andrew Tate type people, right? Yeah. Who extol the virtues of their physical fitness, come from the fighting where he works. That's part of his, his presentation to young men that they should get on board his philosophy and his movement. Part of it is, doing a lot of push-ups and that kind of thing. There's that Bronze Age pervert figure. Do you know that person? BAP.
Bronze Age, no.
Is a Twitter personality that talks a lot about traditional masculinity, and but he feuds with the Christian right. I mean, it's all these individual personalities because I don't know. I'm not even going to get into it, but. But again, these are just a couple individuals who hold right-wing or right-wing adjacent or whatever you want to call them views, and who are also into working out and try to connect the two. But I don't know that there's actually a movement out there.
Well,
I don't know what the trend is.
article tracks it a little bit. It looks at a bunch of kind of
By finding
online...
3 people on Twitter?
No, it looks at a number of online groups that have this relationship, not just saying we love fitness and then also we happen to be Nazis or whatever. The article says the intersection of extremism and fitness leans into a shared obsession with the male body, training, masculinity, testosterone, strength, and competition. Physical fitness training, especially in combat sports, appeals to the far right for many reasons. Fighters are trained to accept significant physical pain, to be warriors, and to embrace messaging around solidarity, heroism, and brotherhood. It's championed as a tool to fight the coming race war and the street battles that will precede it. Recruits are encouraged to link individual moral virtues such as willpower, decisiveness, courage, with desired collective traits such as virility and manliness.
But aren't red states on average more unhealthy than blue states or something? Or there's more obesity?
Well, I think that kind of most people in red states are not Nazis. We're talking about a very small community here, I should hope.
Really small. Again, 5 people on Twitter.
You don't think that so there was a piece that came out today or yesterday about broadly the crisis of masculinity, which I think has been acknowledged across the political spectrum. People like Jordan Peterson are making an effort to help young men who feel alienated, I would argue, for largely economic reasons, and have not met the touchstones that people traditionally met in terms of owning a house or being able to afford a car and children and a wife and all of those kinds of things, helping them to feel less unmoored, teaching them how to clean their rooms and how to eat a certain diet. He advocates for an all-meat diet, which is how to eat a certain diet and how to improve your life, right? That's a more kind of conservative leaning version of it. Obviously, there's a lot of health and wellness stuff on the left as well. Everybody loves physical fitness. That's not partisan in the least. But I do think there's obviously efforts to reach out to the disaffected by offering a plan for them to improve their life, including through personal fitness, especially for like incels,
Sure.
people who feel alienated from relationships, perhaps because of how they look, or they're not just doing well with women or whoever they're attracted to. Obviously reasonable advice is like work out, become conventionally attractive, whatever. So I don't think that's necessarily an own to point out that that's a reality in the culture. The question is, if there is something particularly pernicious about this, I don't know.
I mean, young men and people in general, are living at home for too long. That hurts your dating possibilities. Are not getting jobs and are just reliant on their parents. Not having a job really hurts you. I think the over credentialism a little bit in our society has in some ways hurt young men more than women. I mean, we're talking gross generalizations and abstractions and everything, but women are outpacing men in the number of people enrolling in college, for instance, because I think women seem to be again, can find plenty of counterexamples, but on net seem to be doing better at that kind of at college. When as education becomes more and more incumbent before you can get a job, it's you have to get a degree, now you have to get another degree. Delaying that kind of thing. It seems like men, on average, are not well served by that, or don't stick with it, or don't want to go all the way through it, and that has not been a good trend. We talk a lot about like the loneliness, obviously, of men and boys, although as far as I can tell from the data on social media, the usage is much more punishing for women than for men.
I have a lot of empathy for people's feelings of isolation and loneliness. But I do think the reason that sometimes we focus more on men in that context rather than women is not because women are not also feeling isolated and lonely, but because there are expressions of that angst that sometimes are disproportionately represented among men. So whenever there's a mass shooting, we're talking about it. And statistically, I'm not saying because women are superior or anything, but statistically, women are not doing those kinds of things. They're just suffering in silence, I guess, instead of taking it out on other people. And I do think the question of like, why is there this different response to isolation and loneliness is an interesting one. And the argument that many people who are more left-leaning make is that toxic masculinity or traditional patriarchal viewpoints, or whatever you want to call it, it hurts men. Because it tells men you have to be a provider, you have to be the bread earner, you have to be this big, tough guy, or otherwise you don't have any intrinsic personal worth. And also, you're not allowed to be intimate and share your feelings with your friends. Men aren't allowed to cry on each other's shoulder without being accused of being gay, and all of these sorts of things that make isolation actually more acute for men. And sometimes, feminists, people who want more gender equality, they're making the case that holding on to some of those traditional values is making your lot worse in life. And now some of these people are saying the opposite, that you can use this to your advantage. If you're feeling like you're not meeting traditional male standards, well, just turn that around. Become an MMA fighter, eat red meat, like Jordan Peterson says, neg women at the club, do these things to assert your dominance and control. And I think that's an ongoing battle about what the best way to save men is.
All the things you were describing have sort of lessened as social pressure. Like there's less pressure to be the tough guy or the provider or not share your emotions.
Sure.
I mean, there's a lot less today than in the 1950s.
Sure, there's less.
Like so much less.
But there's still quite a bit.
Okay, but to the extent the conversation seems to suggest, and I'm not sure this is actually the case, but that people are more lonely or more mentally unhealthy, it makes me wonder, is that actually true? Do we just actually measure and survey people's discomfort? Are people much more ready to admit that they have a problem or that they are unhappy or that things are not right, so much more so than they would have 50 years ago or 100 years ago, where no one would be caught, no man alive would be caught dead admitting that everything is not, copacetic in their lives? That's what I wonder.
I don't think you can look at our
fatalistic.
I don't think that the problem that men are experiencing and that a lot of people are experiencing is because like there's just too much therapy culture and we're too in touch. I'm not saying this is how I'm doing a maximalist version of your argument. Too much in touch with our feelings. I think there's a massive opioid epidemic. I think there's a housing crisis. I think the cost of housing has gone up 500% in the last 20 years. I think the price of education has also risen exponentially along with the requirement to get an education, something that is not only affecting men in these ways as they graduate in lower rates, but student debt is overwhelmingly concentrated among lower income people and people who have historically not been allowed to go to college, specifically Black and brown Americans who have many times the amount of student debt as other people, and that all of these things are toxic and weighing in on societies. People who are very online know that in like the Black media space, these like gender wars are the subject of every single podcast in the world. Every single like media conversation is, okay, but what if the woman earns more than the man? And what is their obligation in the home if the man isn't doing X, Y, and Z? And it's because the gender gaps that we're describing here are even more pronounced in the Black community, where women are out graduating men like 3 to 1 from college, okay? So like, I'm very familiar with this, but we're also seeing very different discourses in that community than what's in the white community. It's not the same like incel MMA fighter stuff. It's not better or worse, but it's presenting in different kinds of ways. And I see the toxicity affecting people in their relationships and in their personal lives in all kinds of ways. And so I am really interested in this. I do think it's silly to say that fitness is bad just because conservatives are doing it, and I don't think that's what this article argues, but it is worth having a conversation about what purpose the fitness movement is serving in various communities. Is it recruiting people to do things that are actually benefiting them, their lives, and creating social cohesion? Sometimes. Is it recruiting people to a far-right Nazi ideology? Sometimes. And I think you can disaggregate those things and not blame fitness for the underlying stuff there.
All right, well, you tell us in the comments how you feel about these trends, and we'll have more Rising right after this.